Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast. Each week you'll find inspirational, motivational interviews with some of the world's best language learners, industry experts, all trying to help you to learn foreign languages better, faster, and more efficiently. And here we go. If you're looking for a language teacher to enhance your language learning, then I highly recommend italki. Italki is the world's biggest tutoring platform, and you can find thousands of teachers and tutors at very reasonable prices. Get a free lesson after completing your first lesson by going to languageteacher.co. Episode 150 of the Actual Fluency Podcast. 150 episodes. Can you imagine? It's quite exciting, really, to have made it this far. And I know there were some rocky periods along the way. There might have been some extended breaks, but this really marks one of the most committed projects that I've ever done. So I just wanted to take a few minutes here in the beginning to celebrate the sort of round number and just give a little update of what's going on. So this has been, I started the Actual Fluency Podcast in 2013, I want to say. So it's been almost 6 years. Has it been 6 years? Or was it 2014, possibly? It probably was 14. So I've been 5 years doing this now. And it's been a lot of fun. And it's been very, I think for language learning, at least for my own language learning, it's been very helpful in not only learning what other language learners are doing in terms of methods and strategies, but also staying motivated to keep working on my own languages, keep exploring. As many of you know, I'm not exactly a hyper polyglot. I'm not someone who learns, a new language every year. In fact, for the last few years, I've hardly been adding new stuff to my resume, and the languages that I'm working on, sort of Russian and Hungarian, as the two primary ones, have been going at a sort of slightly slower rate than I would have loved. But I have moved countries a couple of times, and I've had a lot on my plate over time, as many of you who follow me in the Actual Fluency email club would know all about. I'm not going to sit here and spend ages before the episode to talk about myself. If you do want more information, feel free to reach out or join that email club where I often send updates about what's going on. But it's been a good run. Not that it's over. In fact, I just want to say that it's on quite the opposite. I've just confirmed that we're going to be doing another 20 episodes. So that will be most of 2019, definitely continued there. And actually, one thing I do want to mention here is, if you are sitting out there and you have an interesting language learning story about yourself, or you can recommend someone or nominate anyone that you'd like to hear from on the show, please do send in your recommendations. As we're getting over 150 episodes, there's obviously less and less people that I'm aware of that I could invite to the show. I try to go to all the conferences as well, and I do meet people there. Last year I didn't really go, which is why I don't have many sort of potential guests on the cards as it is right now. But hopefully with all the events this year, I can add a lot of people to the potential guest list and invite them on. But in the meantime, if you have an interesting story about learning languages, or someone who could be a potential guest on the show, don't hesitate to contact me, and I'll reach out to them, see if they want to come on and share their story. And last but certainly not least, I just want to thank everyone for their support over the years. It's been absolutely essential for the show. I mean, if I hadn't received so many wonderful messages of support from you guys, I'm sure the podcast wouldn't have lasted more than 10, 20 episodes, So definitely really grateful for the fact that you guys are listening in so regularly and you're sending me messages of support, especially during those tougher times that do seem to come up occasionally. But this is for you, honestly. If it wasn't for you, the show would have definitely not continued for 150 episodes. So thank you so much for listening. You mean the world to me. And let's crack on with the episode before I start to get too sentimental. So enjoy the episode. Today is with Lindie Botes, who's from well, let her explain that. Actually, that's a longer story. But in the episode, we get to hear a little bit about what it means to have many identities, or being the product of a lot of geographical living locations. That's the worst description anyone has ever given of that. But basically, her family and her, when she was younger, they lived in different countries. And so she has a lot of experience in different cultures and different languages. And in later years, she got really interested in Asian languages. So, but like I said, let her tell you all about that. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and see you in the next one. All right. Well, in that case, I just want to formally welcome you to the Actual Fluency Podcast. Thank you for taking the time on a lovely Sunday here to chat with me. So, do you want to give the listeners just a little introduction to who you are, where you're from, and how you got the interest in learning foreign languages?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Lindie, and currently I work as a designer in Singapore. But so answering the question of where I'm from is one of the most difficult questions ever, because there's a short answer and a long answer. So I was born in South Africa, but because of my dad's job, I grew up in Dubai, Islamabad, Paris, and spent some significant time in Tokyo. And then I finished university in Pretoria, South Africa, started working in Johannesburg, and now I am in Singapore. And I guess with my exposure of living in foreign countries a lot, I got quite interested in learning foreign languages, though I never really took it seriously until about my last year at high school, when I started learning Korean in about my 9th grade of high school. And then exploring Korean led me to realizing how similar it is to other languages like Japanese and Mandarin Chinese. So in my last year of high school, I actually spent more time studying foreign languages than I did for my final year exams. But I guess that's when I realized I had a passion for it. And it just kind of kept growing from there. But I have been exposed to languages at school. So, growing up in Pakistan and Dubai, I had to take Urdu and Arabic at school. But unfortunately, not having practiced those, or not having taken those languages very seriously back in the day, I cannot claim to speak those languages per se. So my interest really lies in Asian languages. Mm-hmm. And yeah, apart from working as a designer, my side gig is making YouTube videos about language learning and posting about my language adventures and failures on Instagram.
Fantastic. What did your dad do? Was he a spy, or was it kind of?
I get that question a lot. People tend to associate diplomats with spies, but it is not that glamorous and exciting. Okay. So, nope. just a diplomat.
That's what you would have said. Let's just pretend for a second. No, just kidding, of course. But did you, I've obviously a lot of us never had that experience of moving around a lot. So can you explain or give an idea of the environment that you would be in if you moved that much? Would you be just dropped in the middle of sort of the foreign culture, or would there be like an enclave or like a bubble of the language that you came, or the country you came from?
Interesting question. Yeah. So lucky is relative. In my family's case, my parents are extremely open to foreign cultures and foreign languages. And with that, we tended to mix with the locals quite a lot. So, growing up, I remember always having, Pakistani families over for dinner, or having dinner at a local Emirati's house, rather than, only hanging with fellow South Africans, which I think was very, very beneficial to adapting to a new culture. Like, the more time you spend with the locals, the easier it is to understand why people do things a certain way. And I find that my mom is a very culturally sensitive person, just because of the amount of time she spends with locals. So I remember when we just moved to Pakistan, she was having a bit of culture shock about, the living conditions and growing up in a country like that. And she was hanging out with some local friends at a party, and they asked her, what is Pakistan like? How are you enjoying it? And she just burst out crying. And then she took out a tissue and started blowing her nose. And they said, "No, you don't do that here." And then she cried even more because, like those small nuances, like knowing that you're not allowed to blow your nose in public. How else are you going to learn if you're not thrown
That,
into the situation, with the locals telling you? So I guess there are ups and downs, but the only way to adapt is to experience it firsthand rather than just surrounding yourself or rather isolating yourself with fellow expats.
yeah, because I see that I hear almost horror stories about that a lot, about people who move abroad but tend to stay in these very often English expat bubbles and don't really get much exposure to the foreign, not the foreign, the local community. So it's good that you had that experience.
Absolutely. I was actually just searching for an apartment today, and the apartment I found, the agent said, "Oh yeah, there are quite a few expats staying here," and I was like, "Why are you telling me this? I could not care less." I moved to an Asian country. I moved to Singapore to meet the locals. Why would I come halfway across the world to talk to other expats? That's not
Yeah,
why I'm here.
but it just shows you that that's what a lot of people do. So he's
Yeah,
probably used to that. They
true,
might even ask about that when they look for the apartments, like English
indeed.
speakers around. Or, but I guess Singapore is quite good with English, isn't it? Or maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, Singlish has quite a strong intonation. Like the intonation is a bit difficult to get used to at the start. But yes, English is one of the four official languages here.
Right. So one could live in English if one wanted to in Singapore.
Absolutely, but I think if you're ordering coffee or something, even in English, you would use very specific Malay and Hokkien terms to order your coffee. So, for example, or tea. So, siudai means less sugar. So you would really sound like a foreigner if you say, "Can I have coffee with less sugar?" You just say kopi siudai.
Right.
So knowing those phrases will help you get along. But yeah, totally fine to manage with English.
Fantastic. Yeah, because it's always also good to, not that this is a travel podcast in any way, but it's always nice to give a little bit of an insight into the various countries that are represented. So I always like to ask some of those questions.
Mm.
Did you find it hard as a when you were younger, growing up in so many places? Did you have some sort of identity crisis, or was it hard to make friends when you moved to a whole new culture? Can you share some of that?
Interestingly enough, the identity crisis and culture shock came in mostly when I moved back to South Africa after each country we stayed in, because having grown up with such different experiences and such different worldviews, especially as a primary or high school student, coming back to your country of birth and being so different, even though you're supposed to be like your peers, that was always very hard. But now as an adult, it's panned out a lot more, and I've learned to, for lack of a better word, make peace with my identity. And yeah, I mean, you learn cultural skills and adapt to situations, and you start reading people better. So at high school, people would often say, "I'm a snob because all I ever speak about is, Dubai." But that was my only reference. And that was my only worldview at the time. That was all I knew. But now it's easier to adapt to the situation and adapt your conversation to not come across as too different.
Right. So for someone who's been, I mean, you're so well traveled at such a young age. How did you get a passion for Asia specifically? How did that come about?
Quite accidentally. I think these days with Hallyu and K-pop becoming so popular, it's a lot of people have started learning Korean because of K-pop, which is a totally valid reason. But for me, my mom saw an ad for Korean language lessons in the newspaper, and we had some Korean friends in Dubai, and we were friends with really good friends with a sweet Korean family, but it didn't go further to learn their language. But when my mom came to me about this ad, she's like, "Do you want to learn Korean?" I'm like, "Okay, let's try." And honestly, that was how it started. And after visiting Korea for the first time, I realized how in love I became with the culture. Just it's so rich in history and the just how different the Korean language is to what I knew. Made it super fascinating for me, and I started getting an interest in languages with different scripts, so Japanese and Thai and Chinese. And I guess since I'm a visual person and I'm really interested in typography and design, learning these languages with different scripts was motivation in itself to keep going with Asian languages.
Right. And then you moved in, and then the rest is history, as they say. Really sealed the deal in a way, and just kept learning. And then you moved there, so you kind of cemented that, and now you're living in Singapore as well. Oh, when did you make the? Can you just take us back to? Was it you said high school? You were having where was that again?
So I went to high school in Dubai and finished my high school in Pretoria.
Okay.
But my parents then moved to Japan when I was at my first year of university. So I would visit them in the university holidays, and I did my internships there. And because of that, I always wanted to work in Japan, and that was my life goal, go to Japan. But it didn't work out that way. The companies. Hello?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay. So, yeah, working in Japan didn't really work out because the companies needed a lot of experience. And for a while, I was not interested in Singapore at all for a few personal reasons. And then I just started applying for jobs in different countries. And I thought, well, if Japan doesn't work, then any other country in Asia should be exciting. And then I guess the doors just open here. And now I'm here seeing what it's like.
Fantastic. And you were learning Japanese in South Africa because of your parents, or did you get that before?
Right. So I actually started learning katakana, which is a Japanese script, in middle school, but really casually with a friend, and then put that on pause for years until my last year of high school. A friend and I started getting curious about Japanese, but that was also very casual. But then the real motivator was as soon as I heard my parents are moving to Japan, I thought, well, now I've got the motivation, better start learning now because it's definitely going to be useful.
Right. And can you take us back to how that experience was in the beginning of, because it's for many people, I haven't personally had any experience learning Japanese or indeed any Asian language, but was it very difficult, or what kind of materials did you seek out? How was that experience like in the beginning?
Lucky for me, Japanese grammar is very, very similar to Korean. So um, things like particles that we don't really have in English, like the object and the subject particle, that concept was a lot easier to understand because I was familiar with it from Korean. But so if I may maybe rather speak about learning Korean from scratch because I had no reference.
Yeah, that would be great.
That did take a lot longer. So reaching the same level of fluency in Korean in Japanese took a lot shorter than it took me to get fluent in Korean, if that makes sense. So
Definitely.
to get to a conversational level in Korean, it took me between 3 to 5 years, whereas in Japanese, it was about 2 to 3 years, just because of the exposure I already had to Korean, which made me understand the grammar structures and vocabulary a lot faster because I had a connection.
Right.
And I guess that makes it really difficult to answer the question, how long does it take to learn a language? Because
I hate that question.
I know. And I can understand why people ask it if they don't have experience learning a number of languages. They must think, study 3 hours a day for 5 months and then you'll be conversational. It doesn't work like that because people have different studying methods. People have different ways of retaining vocabulary, and it all depends on your home language as well. So if I were a native Korean speaker, learning Japanese would be even faster.
Right.
But as a native Afrikaans speaker, having to make that mental shift between the grammar being so different, it took a lot longer.
Yeah. And what was the lessons with your mom? Was that the beginning, or had you started already with Korean before?
No, the lessons with my mom was totally from scratch, and it didn't go very well because we were the only 2 students in the class who took it very seriously. And then it kind of fizzled out at the end, and then I actually took over from the Korean teacher, and those other students who stayed, I became their tutor.
Wow.
But yeah, you were asking about resources. Unfortunately, in South Africa, it's very difficult to find resources for Asian languages. It's mostly, the French, Spanish, German, Italian. So I found what really helped me was to join online communities of people learning the language, or to download apps that Korean people use a lot, or apps that are popular in Japan, and just try and read my way through it and make friends there to pick up the language online rather than through books.
Right. I can imagine that must be rare in the South African libraries to find Korean for beginners in Afrikaans or even English.
Yeah.
Not many of those around. But I don't know if that's a lot better today. I guess it's the digital. It's still all digital with the apps and like online websites and courses. Not too many books. Books are still around, but not as popular for language learning anyway.
I think with the amount of South Africans who are teaching English in Japan and Korea, in recent years I have been noting a lot more Japanese and Korean textbooks in bookstores.
Wow.
But they're generally the big names like the Berlitz and the Tuttle, whereas I find that the resources that work the best are made by companies in the respective countries. So, for example, Yonsei University making Korean textbooks, they are Korean and they know the language better than a Berlitz, for example, would.
Right.
Or rather their teaching method is more adapted to the grammar.
Right, and that's from English as well, or did you use other languages to learn it?
I did use Korean to learn Japanese, and Japanese to learn Vietnamese and Chinese.
Right. It's a good recommendation for learning many languages is the more you know, the easier the next ones will be.
Absolutely, and learning another language in another language helps keep the latter one alive or active.
Definitely. But I think the biggest one is just the fact that you have some references for you mentioned something like the particles. For me, that's not. I wouldn't have any idea what that means because I haven't studied any Asian languages. But once you have those grammar points, you could then and I hear this a lot. I don't know if you've heard this a lot. The conferences or the meetups or anywhere where people who learn languages go. They always say something like, "Oh, that's like X language doing that," and people you can kind of geek out about it a lot.
Yes, it helps to make those connections.
Yeah, exactly. So that's almost like it should always almost be a meme, but it hasn't quite made it that far. But I just at every conference, if you're talking about a specific structure or grammar point or something, someone will almost always link it to some other language in some way. And it really helps when you're learning your next languages that you have those reference points. Maybe just the confidence as well. I don't know if you ever had any wavering confidence in your language learning ability, but I definitely know it from my own personal experience. And when people get into it, it can be a little disheartening because it's a big task and the progress might be a little bit slow in the beginning.
I do find from a lot of the messages I get online, people tend to have this really either a very blue sky vision, like, oh, I can be fluent in 2 months in any language, or they get so caught up in the details, thinking like, this is an entire language I need to learn. Where do I start? How can I become fluent? Instead of just saying, well, I only have this one vocab list that I could find. Let me try and learn a few words and then, be innovative and try and make my own sentences. I think they get so stressed by the fact that either there are too many resources or too few, and people get disheartened very quickly when they think of it as an entire language they need to learn. Whereas we need to remember language learning is a lifelong journey and not just something that you should set a deadline to.
Definitely. We'll just take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, italki, but we'll be right back. On this podcast, I've interviewed hundreds of language learners, some of the world's greatest polyglots and industry experts. And one thing they all agree on is the value of one-to-one tutoring lessons. And for this, I highly recommend italki. They have thousands of teachers in all price ranges, and they even have certified teachers who have taken diplomas or have degrees in the language you're learning. So whether you're just brushing up on your Italian ahead of a trip to Rome, or you want to master Russian to take the exam, or whatever your goals are in languages, italki has a tutor suitable for you. And compared to private tutoring offline, it's really affordable. You can find informal tutors down to $5 an hour, and you can have trial lessons for even less. So if you want to master a language from the comfort of your own home, and you even get a $10 credit when you complete your first lesson, go to languageteacher.co and check out italki. It might be the best thing you do for your language learning this year. I say that all the time, actually, about for me, the enjoyment is from day one. And I'm not the most extroverted, let's say, outgoing person if I don't know the person I'm speaking to. But if you look at someone like Moses McCormick on YouTube, or you see the smile in people's faces, and that's with memorizing 5 questions and answers. It's not taking a lot of time, and I think that's really what I would like to share with people, is that learning a language is really not about learning a language. It's about learning a little bit at a time, whether that's words or phrases or stories or whatever, idioms, and then you build it into something if you want to, or you just leave it at that, whatever you want to do.
And the point of language is to communicate, and we shouldn't be so caught up in having perfect grammar and an extensive vocabulary when we just want to get an idea across. And even if you know just baby words, if you could put them together and someone can understand the context, then you've achieved your goal of communication.
Exactly.
But everybody also has different goals, and some people have asked me, is it okay to learn a language just because I like the script? Or is it okay to learn Japanese just because I watch anime? And I don't think I'm qualified to say yes or no. That's a very personal decision. So if you want to learn to watch anime, by all means, if that's what gives you motivation, then who am I to say yes or no?
I think that's a wonderful reason. And it will probably, you've got no shortage of native materials to watch, so
Absolutely.
that person will probably be a lot more successful than the person saying, or having no real reason for doing it.
Exactly.
Just kind of, I kind of feel like learning French. Okay, well, that's great, but can we find some reasons that can be helpful during motivational slumps, or when you're knee deep in vocabulary, or hitting your head against the wall for nasals, and
yes.
so I think it's good to have a purpose. I struggle with that a little bit because I don't really have that much of a rich heritage or anything. My parents were both very Danish, and we haven't found anyone in our family lineage that were foreign. So I don't have that, German grandmother or whatever somewhere. So when you okay, I'd like to learn languages because I like the idea of speaking with more people. I like the intellectual challenge, but actually picking the language was a bit tricky, and I've heard other people share this as well. So now I realize that the more reasons you can give, like the anime, the better, because I had a lot of trouble with Russian just staying interested, because there was absolutely no reason for me to learn Russian in Denmark. Luckily, having a blog and a podcast where I actually told people I was learning it was very helpful. But if I didn't have that, I would have quit for sure.
So what was your starting reason to learn Russian?
Well, I was playing this video game, and there was a lot of Russian players in it. It was like the second biggest player base after China. So in every game there would be like Russian people. So I did have a tiny reason, but I could have.
It was not sustainable to keep you going?
No, not at all, because you don't really speak to people. Like, it's more for shouting, like if you make mistakes, and so the words I was hearing were not very nice. Right. so it was not a very good incentive at all. And also I felt like it was more just grabbed out of thin air. I didn't really think about it at the time. I'm rationalizing it now, but at the time I didn't really think about it. I was just like, well, Russian's a big language. Why not learn that? And I haven't actually wouldn't even say I have learned it. I think that term is extremely hard. Going back to what you said about how long it takes to learn a language, you kind of have to define what learn means to begin with.
Right.
And I think you never finish learning a language, but my level in Russian is definitely not as good as it could have been if I had maybe some of those deeper reasons, like the anime or something like that. So I always recommend people to look at their own history or circle of friends, or like the anime is a great one, but obviously not everyone is going to be able to find something like that. But if you can, I think it's great.
I had quite a similar experience with Dutch, actually. I used to play an MMORPG back in the day, and the server was full of Dutch people. But lucky for me, Afrikaans and Dutch are very, very mutually intelligible. But actually, that made it not really motivating for me to learn Dutch, because I was like, well, I can understand it anyway. Why should I spend this time learning it when, if I am in a life or death situation, I could help myself in Dutch? But actually, I'm very, very shy to try and speak Dutch because I know my accent is going to be extremely Afrikaans, and I'm definitely going to get the grammar wrong because Afrikaans is very simplified grammar. But I mean, that just goes to show I don't have a motivating reason to learn Dutch. So just saying, I get a lot of comments on YouTube saying, "Oh, you speak Afrikaans, you should try learning Dutch," and I'm like, no, I shouldn't, because I don't want to. And if I don't have that motivating factor, like, my favorite singer is Dutch, or I love the Netherlands and I want to travel there. If I don't have that motivating factor, just learning it because you can is not a good enough reason to keep you going in the long term. Like when you were saying, when you hit your head against the wall because of nasals, like you'll get to that point. And I've even gotten to that point in Korean where I've started hating the language for many reasons. And I'm like, why am I even doing this? And then I remember, well, this and this and this is my reason, and that keeps me going.
Yeah, that's exactly what you need it for. I have a similar, I don't know how similar this is, but I also have with Norwegian and Swedish is almost the same as Danish. Just
I was going to ask you.
Yeah, it reminded me of that completely, because they're so close that I didn't have a lot of motivation to learn the languages. And and it's a great shame as well in the Danish school system currently, or when I was in school, that's a fair few years ago, but I don't think they've gotten better anyway. But we had, I think, about a week of Norwegian and a week of Swedish. So we'd read like a couple of classic texts and some dialogue, maybe listen to a tape for both languages. And it's like, how far can you get in a week? But then again, the languages are so close that I'm feeling like, well, why should I, if I can speak my language and they understand 95% of it, what exactly would I get out of the last 5?
Yeah.
But it's like those 5% make all the difference. I've learned now. Like when I was in school, nobody ever considered this and told me this, or I didn't meet anyone. Like we didn't have any exchanges with any schools in those languages or places, and I didn't really watch anything on the TV. We had like 20 channels of Danish and English stuff. Why would I go to the Swedish channels? But then I got a job here in the UK where I had Swedish and Norwegian colleagues like literally next to me. Wow. And then I realized why it's important to get for those 5%, because the experience you can have with people, it's like night and day. It's crazy. Like speaking Danish, I'll be understood. Speaking Swedish or Norwegian, I'll be suddenly appreciated for making the extra effort.
True.
And it's like, it makes such a big difference. Of course, ideally in an office setting, you should probably reach some sort of middle point where you adapt a little bit here and there, both of you. But I like to be the one kind of taking the lead and like putting in the extra effort to try and use the language, and they love it. They make fun of me for my silly pronunciation and say that I have a potato in my mouth and everything, but it made all the difference. And I wish I would have done it much sooner, but I just didn't. I didn't know.
Yeah, and at the time you didn't have that reason, whereas now you have it. And I mean, it's never too late to start, and you can't learn all the languages at the same time. So
no, but it's like the low-hanging fruit. I think makes a lot of sense.
Yes, yes.
To get your confidence and also there's a big history with the Scandinavian languages, and there are other language pairs that have similar experiences like Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, all these language pairs. So if you do have a reason to look into that, I would highly recommend it. If everything else fails and you have absolutely nothing in terms of language pairs, which sounds unlikely, you could also do a bit of Esperanto. I think that's kind of a good, fun little start.
Yes.
Takes like a weekend, to get the basics.
It does, yeah.
so that's a good fun. But I am working on it with the whole Swedish and Norwegian, and it's super easy. Compared to learning a new language, it's basically like just filling in the gaps. Stop using Danish words where there's a Swedish one, and just practicing the pronunciation. But I might get back to you on that with an update. I might want to do some. I'd really like to do like an organized presentation or a course or something where we just take, okay, if you're Norwegian, don't say these words, say these words. And if you like finding the formula, because there must be some rhyme or reason to like maybe the sentence patterns or some of the small words, like the small filler words, that you can learn those really quickly, and then you can sound more Danish, more Norwegian, more Swedish if you want to. But that's a future project. I've got some friends like my Swedish friend Kalle. We're doing it already, so hopefully we can. I'll get back to you on that. It might be
sounds really cool. Yeah, I'd love to hear
for people. And you get to put more flags on your badge at the Polyglot conference.
Yeah.
Although
True.
that's the worst.
I always say, like, just learn Dutch. It's one extra language. I'm like, not that interested. Sorry.
Yeah, you have the same problem. It's almost too close to be like it's not interesting enough to learn.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Because I think that one of the most rewarding things about learning a language is being like, oh wow, this is how it works in this language, or I've never heard of this grammar concept, or this word doesn't exist in my language, and those little moments make it so exciting to discover.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like with Dutch, I'll be like, okay, well, this is just Afrikaans with a different pronunciation and a bit more complex grammar.
Yeah.
It's boring. No offense to Dutch people, beautiful language you have, but I'm sure you feel the same way about Afrikaans. And why do people always ask me to learn Dutch? Why don't they ask Dutch people to learn Afrikaans?
See, that's it. I mean, you're exposing the blatant, what do you call it? Discrimination in the language learning world.
Yes.
Well, I was thinking about learning Dutch, actually.
Well, I think you should think about learning Afrikaans.
Yeah, well, maybe I will.
It's a lot easier.
It's a better reason anyway. I don't have any ties to the Netherlands at all.
Yeah.
But again, looking at that low-hanging fruit, but you have to be careful being tempted, I think, because you have a finite set of like concentration and time as well. Yeah, I mean, most people listening have jobs or families they actually have to attend to, and there's just not enough. But even if you had the time, you probably would still be limited because you can't do 12 hours of language study a day.
Right.
Like your brain would just fry.
And the languages you're currently learning may take priority for a number of reasons. So right now I should be focusing on Chinese. No matter how fun and easy it is to pick up something else, given my circumstances, I should focus on Mandarin.
Oh yeah? What for? Is it for work or?
Oh no, just for, daily life, so I can eavesdrop on people on the subway. Or not be shy to order my chicken rice in Mandarin and not look like the foreigner who's not making an attempt to learn the language when actually I am, but I'm shy.
Right, yeah. But that's the tricky bit, I feel like. But
shyness.
Yeah, for me definitely.
Yeah. I wish we could all be like Moses.
Yeah, he's amazing. I love the guy.
Yeah, he's cool.
His sneaky tactics about
very sneaky. Yeah, and Benny as well. He's got a lot of confidence, and that helps.
Yeah, I feel like I'm always so self-aware when I go up and try and speak a language I'm not very good at, and I think I've realized the last experience I had was in Hungary when I lived there for a while, not
Wow.
really intending to learn the language at all.
Yes.
I just I was actually moving to Germany because that's where all this like online social media, entrepreneurship, all these fancy buzzwords were happening in Berlin, and the rent was
Okay.
still kind of cheap. So I moved there. I was going to move there. I had a flight ticket and everything,
Wow.
but I stopped over in Budapest to do the polyglot workshop with
Yes.
well, I was just listening to the experts, Richard Simcott and Alex Rawlings,
Yes.
teaching me about polyglotism. And I was like, this place is pretty nice. I had never really heard of Budapest before. I knew it was the
Yeah.
capital, and Hungary. I'd heard the word of like the name of the country, but I'd
Yes.
literally never heard about anything from Hungary. It was just sort of Middle European country, and so when I was there, the weather was really nice, and the people seemed friendly, and the prices were very fair, and there was a good mix of old and new. You had the
Yeah.
Hungarian family style restaurants, and then you had Starbucks on the corner. And
Yeah.
to me, I was like, you know what, I'll just stay here. So I didn't go to Berlin, but that did mean that I didn't hadn't prepared any Hungarian whatsoever. So it wasn't ideal. I think looking back, if you do plan to travel to a country and staying there for a while, I would recommend starting months before with the language, so you
Mhm.
at least have a base, because I found it extremely difficult to deal with immigration, taxes,
I can imagine.
finding an apartment, and also, by the way, learning this extremely difficult language that has absolutely nothing to do with any other language you've ever heard of.
Yes. I've learned
Uh,
Hungarian as well, and it was one of the most difficult, also one of the most interesting, just because of how different it is, and I've never seen anything like it. My my interest in Hungarian was so big so quickly, but that wore off pretty soon when I realized how tricky it is and how little exposure in South Africa I had to it.
right. Yeah, it's a fantastic language. I still love it, but because
It's beautiful.
I have very limited reasons to learn it, so I haven't really spent much time since I left. But when I did start getting to know a few phrases and words, and I muster up the courage to start using it as well, the reaction you get from locals is amazing, because
Mhm.
they're not used to tourists speaking Hungarian in any way. Like, they're used to many tourists, but they're
True.
not used to that. So it's a lot of fun. But I think the big change that happened for me was, like, maybe it was taking the fun, or I had to be able to look at the funny side, like, really, that I was there to entertain in a way, almost, because if you take yourself too seriously, then you just be disappointed all the time. Like,
True.
you're not as good as you think in the language anyway.
Yes.
So, so you might as well expect to make mistakes and make people laugh and laugh with them, and that's when I really started to make big progress. So I would say
Yes, yes.
from the first 12 months, I probably had zero progress. Like, I could read a little bit, I did some Astamil, but found it really difficult. Also, because I was there alone, so I didn't really have many. I certainly didn't have many Hungarian contacts that I could talk
Mm,
to. So the people I did meet were like the German meetup, the meetup.com, various meetups, and like
yeah.
hostel parties and all these kind of things. And it was mostly in English, really. But once that I kind of accepted that I was terrible at the language, and I was just there to have some fun, it takes the pressure way off, and I'm just kind of
Very
like,
true.
just as much as I could. But for me, that took a long time, and maybe other people out there who were maybe on the slightly shy, introverted scale,
Mm,
maybe they have a similar experience. I definitely envy someone like Benny or Moses, who could just walk up and
yeah,
say 5 words.
yeah. But you also can't change who you are. If you are, a very analytical person who needs to know exactly why a language works the way it works before you feel confident speaking it, then I mean that's just how
That's it.
you work, and people need to learn to also be easy on themselves and give themselves time. There's no rush.
Yeah, that's a big one. Be easy on yourself, because like I said, you're terrible at the language, probably. Like, that's just the way it is on average. The, the
Mm,
the language you're learning, unless you've studied it for 20, 30 years,
yeah.
you're gonna be like relatively bad at it. That's
Yeah,
just the
well,
way it goes.
I've studied French for 20 years and I'm still bad at it.
There you go. And of course, you can be less bad, but I think having the humility is big. I think that's
Yeah.
very important. But I guess one big question we haven't really touched on is how do you actually learn languages today? Like, what's a good, quick framework that people can use that you've used to get better results?
I find that I'm a very auditory learner and I tend to remember songs and lyrics a lot because I hear it so much. And generally, my main motivating factor for learning a completely new language is having heard music in that language. So, being able to recognize what your learning style is helps a lot to adapt it to your language learning. So, if you are visual, reading in the language a lot and writing out the words, sticking them up around your house, making flashcards, that helps a lot. Whereas for me, I'm auditory and that combined with not having a lot of time to learn languages when I have a full time and a side job, listening to things like podcasts I found to be very effective, or even just listening to music in the language or the radio in that language. And even if I don't understand it, hearing it so much makes me feel more comfortable in trying to reproduce the sounds because I've heard it so much. Something I like to do instead of necessarily working from a textbook and feeling pressure to finish the book is to create my own sentences. So I will look up a few words in topics I'm interested in. So, for example, design. And when I worked in Japan as a designer, I thought, well, ooh, what if I encounter words I don't know how to say at all? And instead of being fearful of that, I started looking up words. And I mean, you can't find that in a textbook. I don't know what you know, font or print or kerning or tracking is in Japanese, all those typography terms. But looking it up online on like Japanese design forums, copy pasting those words, making sure the word is what I think it is, and then creating my own sentences helped me learn a lot. And preparing for conversations in advance. So if I know that I'm going to have a design meeting on packaging design, I would prepare days in advance, look up those words, and then create sentences like, is this package cardboard, or where is this being printed? And if I don't know how to say something, I'll look it up. I'll get it checked by a native speaker online or with a friend. And then that just gives you so much more confidence because you know how to say what you want to say. And if you don't know what the person is replying, then just don't be ashamed to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand, because they know you're the foreigner and they appreciate that you're trying anyway. So that removes some of the pressure.
Right. Do you ever find people switch to English or another language in that case?
Sometimes, not so much when I was working in Japan, because I find that Japanese people are very shy to speak English.
Mm-hmm.
So they would just try and explain in simpler Japanese, which I found very beneficial. But interestingly enough, in a language like Korean, where I consider myself pretty fluent or, very comfortable to keep a conversation going, I find that people tend to switch to English very quickly just because I am this random Caucasian girl speaking Korean. And sometimes their brain cannot compute that there is white girl speaking Asian language. It's very frustrating for a language learner because it feels like they're ignoring all the time and effort you put in to learn their language.
Yeah.
Especially if they have a broken English. If they want to practice their English, by all means, let's take turns. For 1 hour I'll speak Korean and for 1 hour you'll speak English. But if I am, in a shop in Korea and I'm asking somebody for something in fluent Korean and they just blatantly ignore the fact that I'm speaking Korean and try and say something in English so bad that I cannot understand them, it makes it difficult because, as I said earlier, the point of language is communication. And now I don't understand you and you're pretending not to understand me. And that's very frustrating.
Right. And what do you say then? Do you just continue in Korean or what do you do?
I can be very stubborn and passive aggressive. So sometimes I'll continue in Korean, but I generally give in because it's very awkward to go Korean, English, Korean, English. And then I just say, okay, it's fine. We can speak English. And I remember when I worked as a waitress in a Korean restaurant, my boss was quite grumpy when he realized that Korean customers would start having conversations with me in Korean after ordering. And obviously, he has a business to run. He doesn't want me talking to the customers. But then he banned me from speaking Korean the whole time I worked there. But me being passive aggressive, I decided, well, if he's not allowing me to speak Korean, then surely I must also speak English to him. And then I used a very difficult English with very formal words until he got frustrated and said I could speak Korean again, and then the problem was solved. So yes, that's what I do.
Banned from speaking banned from speaking Korean in Korea. Yeah, I mean, that's a great title for a video or book chapter or something.
Yeah, well, it was fantastic. A Korean restaurant in South Africa. But right. Still, I mean, why? I'm working there for a reason, please.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So where do you find for the sentences you make? Do you go on find the pronunciation as well, or how do you know how the sentences are to be spoken? Do you have a tutor you work with, or?
No, I'm mostly self-taught, but if it's, a language like Japanese that I've been learning for a few years, the pronunciation is not too much of a problem. It'll just be, a new word that I'm trying to learn.
Sure.
But if it is something I'm learning from scratch, like right now I'm learning Tagalog, I would not know how to correctly pronounce the word at all. So I would maybe use an app like Hi Native, where you can record yourself and have people check it for you. Otherwise, Forvo, I'm sure you know of Forvo. That's a great way to really hear how the word is pronounced, and then just try and fit the sentence together. And eventually, when I use it and I say it completely wrong and nobody understands me, that is the perfect opportunity to learn how it is supposed to be pronounced correctly.
Right. So you just ask, basically.
Yes. Make a fool of myself and then learn.
Ask. When in doubt, ask. I think that's a good tip.
True.
Definitely. So fantastic. If people are interested, want to know more about you, or maybe they have some questions for you, your experiences, where's the best place for them to find you?
Sure. My website, lindiebotes.com. That's LINDIEBOTES.com. I have a contact form there, and I have some links to my YouTube, my Instagram. So I guess that would be the portal to reach my other social medias. But in terms of answering questions, I'm more active on Twitter and email. But if you want to follow my life, then just search Lindie Botes on YouTube or Instagram.
Fantastic. And well, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your wonderful story with us. It's quite a unique story, definitely. But I think there's a lot of things we can take away and use in our own language learning and your experiences to positively benefit going forward.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I'm a huge fan of your show, so it's an honor to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so kind of you.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. I really appreciate having you here today. Just before you leave, I just want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, which is italki. Italki is a tutoring platform where you can find affordable tutors for every language in the world, pretty much. So get started today and get a free $10 credit when you book your first lesson. If you go to actualfluency.com/italki, that's spelled ITALKI. So give it a go and feel how tutoring can really boost and enhance your language learning.